and welcome to this special edition episode of the podcast to celebrate the launch of my book, You've Got This. If you haven't got it yet, head over to any good bookshop and ask for it. Put it into Google, put You've Got This Rhea Freeman. And if you have, I would love it if you would consider leaving a review. It really does make a huge difference. On this episode of the podcast, I'm speaking to one of the people who let me interview them, and that is Simon Alexander Ong. Simon is an award-winning life coach, a personal development guru, a speaker, and an author of a really good book called Energize, which takes pride of place in my bookshelf. Simon studied economics before working in the financial sector for around 10 years, joining at a really turbulent time, which saw him in and out of work during that period. Because of this encouraged Simon to think about what he really wanted from life, and that led him to the world of coaching, which later led to speaking for organisations and then becoming a keynote speaker on big stages all over the world. It also led him to write his first book, and he continues to develop and do incredible things all the time. I think you're going to love this chat. So full of wisdom, so many really good things to think about. I really think you're going to love it. So if you could start, obviously I have read your book while I'm reading it, which is awesome, but how you came to be where you are now, because you didn't just come straight into this, you came through a rather challenging series of events, didn't you?
So I'll give the high level, and then feel free to get me to dig deeper into any areas that would be of interest. So I started my career in the middle of 2007. I graduated from the LSE in London, did economics as a degree. And I started at what was probably the worst possible time. It was the year before the financial crisis swept across the planet, and the company I was with was Lehman Brothers.
Oh God,
which collapsed into administration 14 months after I joined. So I ended up being in and out of work within the financial services industry for nearly 10 years. And a couple of things. So first is, in hindsight, I feel like it was a universe's sign that I wasn't meant to be employed. And second, the crisis started the process, at least mentally speaking, to really want to think about what I wanted to do with my life. I think if the crisis never happened, maybe I wouldn't have asked those questions as early as I did. But, certain situations, that one of them being the one I opened chapter 1 of the book with, really forced me to reevaluate my life choices. And so that led me to explore the world of entrepreneurship on the side of my full-time job. And then in 2012, I signed up to study about coaching, to understand NLP, how to use the skill of coaching to have an impact on other people. And I just started to build that on the side of my full-time job. And then when I exited that, I started off just coaching people one-to-one, as I guess most coaches do when they first start. And that's all I really wanted to do at the beginning. I just wanted to build a very successful coaching practice. But as with anything in life, when you start on one journey and you really enjoy it, suddenly lots of other opportunities present themselves to you. So from there, I got invited to speak at an organization about the work I do. And from that point, speaking became a much bigger part of what I do. So I began to speak at organizations, conferences, festivals, events to aspiring entrepreneurs that were looking to scale their business. And then in 2019, I did a couple of interviews with the BBC and Sky News, and that sort of opened up my work to a far bigger audience. And in 2020, I had conversations with Penguin about writing a book. And so spent COVID writing my first book, Energize, which was published last year. So that's kind of the journey in a very brief sort of macro overview, but happy to dive into any particular areas if it would be useful for your book there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one thing you said there quite early on was you got into the financial services, the world kind of imploded, and you took that as a sign, or a potential sign. Now, I think that's a real reframe, isn't it? That's a real mindset shift, because a lot of people would not necessarily see that as a, what have I learned? What can I do?
Yeah.
Were you aware of that happening, that mindset shift, or did that come later?
I would say that probably came later, because I grew up with this impression that I had to earn a lot of money. I had to work in the career of a banker, a lawyer, a doctor, or an accountant, jobs that would have good reputations for my family. So they could be proud to tell their friends that, Simon is doing a job in this industry. And so I really never had the chance to question my choices. I just kind of did what I thought would make my parents proud and my family proud of my achievements. And so the crisis, in a way, forced me to question the choice of whether actually is this career in finance still going to make me successful when it may not have the career progression I thought I was going to have. Because every place I went to was being impacted by the crisis. Even if I got a job, the question was, how long would I stay in that job? And so in a way, it forced me to really evaluate those choices. And it was only a few years later, looking back, that I realized that the decision to start that process was such a transformational one. And it got me curious because all I knew up until then was finance. I went to the office and spent most of my days sitting next to people in finance. I would spend my evenings drinking and socializing with people in finance. And I would spend my weekends getting to know people in finance. And so up until that point, I was living in a bubble. And so I wanted to get out of that bubble, get curious about the world outside of that, because I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And so the first place it started was my curiosity. How could I go out there and learn about what other industries there are? If I was to start a business, what business would that be? And just kind of do the research first before I made any rash decisions.
So I think that's the thing as well. When we are thinking of doing different things, one of
Yeah.
the blocks can be people go, I don't know how to. I've got no form in
Mm.
the area. I don't have the money. I don't have the time. This sort of lack of resources can be something that stops people really early on.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've lived through that.
Mm.
How did you overcome that? Was it that curiosity was the first spark, and you thought, I'm going to explore this?
Yeah, the curiosity was the first spark because I had no idea what was out there. And I think when you don't know what you want, of course, you're not going to know what resources you need. I mean, you can go and gather all the resources you want, but it doesn't mean anything unless you know how to direct them towards something. So curiosity was the spark, I think, to go out and learn what businesses there were there, how did people achieve the success they want, study successful case studies, read different books, magazines, watch different shows, listen to different podcasts. So my curiosity started the learning process. And that learning process opened my eyes to lots of different things that I could get involved in. And so what that did is over time, it changed the relationship I had with my job. Even though I didn't like what I was doing, I didn't let it affect me from an energetic standpoint, because a lot of people look at their job and say, is this it? And they see it as a dead end, and it can make them feel very drained of energy. But I saw it as almost a stepping stone to what I was meant to do, even though at the point I didn't know what that was yet. But if I was to use an analogy of running a business, I saw the job as my investor,
Yeah.
and the job was giving me capital to explore what I wanted to do. And so, in a way, I became grateful for the fact I had a job and that I had an income and I had the benefits and I had the bonuses, because then that was able to finance the ability for me to go and experiment, to explore, to sign up to courses, to sign up to seminars, and just to test things. And it was through that experimentation that I discovered I wanted to be a coach and I wanted to impact people's lives in a more direct way.
And the way that you did that, because again, I think people think, well, I've got the security of this job. Even if I don't
Mm.
like the job, there's a security of this job, the security of this regular pay packet. And I think sometimes people feel they need to kind of chuck all that to one side and go all in on
Mm.
something else. And lots of people I've spoken to through this book and people I coach, I always say, well, can you test it? Can you go slowly? Let's not, because it's not saying that something's going to be a failure, but it's giving yourself, I think, the maximum chance of success. So what would your kind of thoughts be on leaving that security, and should you go all in on something?
For me, I mean, I'll explain how it works for me, because I was very risk averse. I'm from a Chinese background, and as Chinese, we are very risk averse. We like to know that something has a fair chance to succeed before we jump in. So the way I made that decision to take the leap of faith is I arrived at this moment where I had my daytime job. It was a very comfortable research job. I deliberately chose a research job because it was less stressful. It was a 9 to 5 job. So I had my evenings and weekends to myself and to explore my curiosities. But on the side, I had got 3 coaching clients. I knew I could not get a fourth. If I had a fourth client, my coaching would suffer because I only had the evenings and weekends to coach. And also my day job would suffer as well. I just wouldn't show up in the same way. I would be completely exhausted. And so I was presented with this dilemma. Do I continue with my day job and limit myself to just 3 clients? Or do I quit my day job and see just how far I can take this? And it wasn't an easy decision. You know, I went back and forth in my head for probably 4 to 5 months, talking with close friends, talking with my wife about it. And in the end, I took the leap of faith. I quit the day job and I tried my hand at entrepreneurship. And of course, you know, it's been an incredible ride since then, but I would not have known any of this ahead of time. And so I think you need to have some sort of foundation before you make that leap. Otherwise, what's going to happen is that when you say goodbye to one thing and you start on the path of entrepreneurship, if you don't have any foundation or any momentum behind you, you are going to come across as desperate, you know, because when you run a business, cash is oxygen. And if you don't have the cash in the bank, you're going to get to a point where people can feel that energy. They can feel in the sales conversation, when you talk about the new product or the service you're selling, they can feel an air of desperation. And you don't want that. You want to show them that you can be of service and you can be valuable, but you don't necessarily need them now, because otherwise that repels them from wanting to do business with you. So that's what I learned through that process is, you know, you've got to build something on the side, especially if you're coming from working in a full-time job, to make that transition easier. Or if you have the opportunity, not everyone has the opportunity, but if you have the opportunity, is to take advantage of those sabbaticals or time off work.
Mm. Do you think that also feeds into your self-confidence? I was reading your book all about, you know, you need to be your biggest backer, your biggest believer. If you kind of go along this route and you don't have that grounding, is it more difficult to have that confidence?
Absolutely. You've got to back yourself. You have to have conviction, because if you don't believe in yourself, how do you expect anyone else to? It's why when I talk to entrepreneurs or I talk to salespeople in companies, I always say to them, there are 2 sales that occur. The second is selling you to others, and the first is selling you to you. And until you can sell you to you well, the second will always remain a challenge. Now, having conviction doesn't mean you're going to have days where you have a bit of fears, you have a bit of self-doubt. It is part of the human experience. But backing yourself with conviction is you simply saying to yourself, I know I can do this. The question is when. But I'm going to give it my all. And yes, there are going to be days where I'm going to have setbacks, I'm going to have challenges, but I have the conviction that I can respond well to them. And when it comes to confidence, which is the other word you mentioned there, we tend to think we need to be confident first before we can do something. Mm-hmm. You actually don't need confidence. Confidence is a byproduct of courage. So the first thing you need is actually courage, the courage to take a step into the unknown, the courage to try something you've never done before, the courage to reach out to someone and say hi, or find a way to add value, or ask them a question. Because once you've done that and it happens, so someone responds or something works out well for you, that's what creates confidence. The knowledge that you can do something, the knowledge that, well, if I can do this, what else would be possible? And then you generate that confidence. That confidence feeds into your self-belief. And then you try something more, you try something bigger, and that generates momentum. And that momentum is powerful.
How do you take that first step, though? If you're at that point where you just are, you know, you're kind of paralyzed by fear, how do you take that first step?
2 things. The first thing is to focus on what you can control. The reason we get paralyzed is because we are immersed in things we cannot control. And when you spend too much time on the things you cannot control, you very naturally become paralyzed by overthinking. So you start thinking to yourself, what if this doesn't work out? What if I'm struggling with funds? What if I can't pay this? What if I can't pay that? Now, the thing is, nobody actually knows. You know, I had no idea on any of those questions before I started. But then I said, actually, if I focus on the things I can control, and there's always something small you can control. So things I could control were, well, how many people can I reach out to this week? How many events can I go to get people to know about the work I'm doing? What content can I produce and put out on social media that would tell people about how I can influence their lives? Now, these are things you can control.
Mm.
You can't affect the outcome, i.e., how people respond to them, but you can control the output that you generate. And the second thing to make courageous acts easier for you to take is to change your environment. You know, if you are in an environment where nobody is taking the courage to do anything different, then of course you are going to find it very difficult. But if you move yourself into an environment where people are constantly taking courageous acts of bravery to try things and experiment with things that are different to most people, then naturally you are going to end up doing those things as well. And so when I started, those first influences on my environment were the books I read. The authors of the books I read became my unofficial mentors. And then physically, I started spending time in different communities and with different people that would transform my habits, because the habits I aspired to embrace were their normal. They were already embracing this every day. And so it made it easier for me to take those steps into the unknown.
And that actually leads me beautifully onto one area in the book is about tribes in inverted commas. And obviously your book, you talk all about energy. Before we press record, we talked about
Yeah.
radiators and drains. And the tribes or the people that you surround yourself with can have a dramatic effect on you and your success and your mindset and so much, can't they?
Yeah. Absolutely, because we are influenced by the people, things, and places we spend most time around. It's inevitable. You know, put another way, as I share with some audiences, if you spend time with 5 of your fittest friends, in no time you'll be the 6th. If you spend time with 5 millionaires, in no time you'll be the 6th. If you spend time with 5 successful business owners, in no time you'll be the 6th. The reason why environment has such a profound impact on our mindset and what we see as possible is because you are watching a live living example of someone doing the things you wish to do and getting results from it. And when you see what is possible, it shatters your ceiling. Because if you're in an environment where, let's say, the person who's most ambitious in your circle is a managing director of a company, then that's a position you are going to aim for. You would say, my hope is I want to become the managing director of this company. But if you shift your environment to one where the most ambitious person has a best-selling book, is speaking on stages across the world, is recording video content on YouTube, and is enjoying their life and traveling the world, guess what? You're going to see that's possible now. You're going to see that as, hey, they've now changed what I think I can achieve. They set the example. And I think that's why environment is so crucial and also one of the biggest contributors towards making progress towards where you want.
I completely agree. On your journey, what has been like the biggest block? What's been the thing that's been most challenging for you to overcome, and how did you do it?
So many challenges, actually. I think from the beginning, the biggest challenge was telling my family about what I was doing. You know, I grew up in a very strict Chinese household. It was do well at school. If you haven't done well, why haven't you done well? Get a good job, and have a good family. You know, and have great children. Yeah, very much typical of most families. But I didn't want to, or I couldn't tell my immediate family, because first, nobody had ever run a business before, and second, because I knew I would be questioned and ridiculed. In my head, I had this scenario of my dad and my uncles and aunts saying, well, why are you giving up such a well-paid job with pension and benefits and insurance for something where all of that is not a given? You don't know what you're going to earn month to month. You know, you can't take days off, because otherwise where are you going to get the money from? And so I actually didn't tell them for a couple of years about this transition I was going on, which was very mentally challenging for me. And it was only when I started to experience some success that I shared it with them. And the moment I saw my dad share one of my videos on his social media was a beautiful moment. So for me, that was quite challenging. But it also showed me the importance of environment, because I didn't have that ability to share it with them, I sought the counsel from other people who I could learn from. So that's when the idea of the MBA came in. In the book, I share the idea of a mental board of advisors. So I created in my mind this counsel that I could seek insight and perspective from. But also, as I got to know other people who were doing well, I saw them to be my mentors, to kind of share my challenges, to share what I was doing, to have that community that could help me thrive.
So I was reading in your book about when you got your, I think it was your university results, and you kind of came down the stairs and they'd had kind of champagne and ice, and that just that feeling of kind of taking on, obviously, I imagine you were very disappointed, but feeling that pressure from everybody else as well. So I can completely understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And if we do fear ridicule, if we do fear people not understanding, and it's frames of reference, isn't it? If they've never run their own business, how would they know? They're not you. You know, you've been in that situation. It's and also parents always want the best for us, but what they think is the best might not actually be the best for us.
Exactly.
There's a lot going on there. Is there anything else that you would like to kind of add or share in connection to what we've been chatting about?
Well, I guess what would help give me context, what do you think would be most useful for your readers?
You've given so much value, actually. I've been the chapters in the book here. I'm like, yeah, we've done that, which is amazing. And it fits into so many things, what you're saying in general terms. I guess one thing that'd be quite useful, I think, is a bit about kind of setting goals, because I'm currently writing that chapter now, and I've gone down the kind of SMART method, although I don't really like the SMART method. I don't like the letters. And goal setting, I think, is very kind of in at the moment. And people, again, I think, can get really overwhelmed by that. They can worry about if their goal changes. And I will say to clients, that's not the point. You're allowed to change when you learn more. But what advice would you give people about how to set goals for themselves? What's important when setting a goal?
So the way I see goals is that there's a difference between goals and vision. And I would start with the vision, actually. So there's a saying I often share on social media, which goes, visualize in decades, plan in months, execute daily. Now, the idea with the vision is that it's more emotional than a goal. So a goal for me is more like a milestone. So a goal could be, for example, write 200 words a day if I'm in the process of putting a book together. So it's very specific, and it's either you've done it or you've not done it. But there's not too much emotion with it. Whereas a vision is much more visual by its very nature. So it could be, well, my vision is to expand what I do into America, to take my work onto television and film, and to leave a legacy that shows people that anything is possible when they channel their energy in the right way. Now, that's something that for me has an emotional pull. Now, where the goal comes in is the goals are then the stepping stones towards that vision. And at the beginning of the year, when you set your goals, it's then to have the context of that vision. Well, with this vision in mind, what are the goals that are going to help me get there? And when I say goals, I actually set them in 90-day sprints. So what are my goals for the next 90 days? Because I know that in 3 months' time, I might be in a very different position, or something changes. I might get an opportunity come up, which means I'm going to have to set very different goals. If you were setting goals in January 2020, 90 days would have been optimal, because then in April 2020, the world went into lockdown. So everybody's goals probably had to shift anyway. So I think of it in sort of 90-day sprints there. But if I had to choose just one goal that I think we should all focus on, it is simply to be better than who we were yesterday. Because I think if you can satisfy that goal of saying, yes, I am a little better than who I was yesterday, in time, you will reap the rewards.
I love that. Oh, I love you. Very much so. I mean, I think, again, I've been reading your book, I've been kind of nodding away, because it all just makes so much sense, and it's very, very well put. And I think the vision is, what you've just described is brilliant, because that's the thing that pulls you through when you are thinking, I'm too tired to do this. It's not, I've got to do 100, 200 words a day. It is that bigger vision that makes you pull yourself together, go and sit at your computer.
And I guess the way I see it is you got to see things with both a macro and micro lens. So the macro lens is the vision, the micro lens is the goal. So the goal is the now. What am I doing today to move me a little closer to where I want to be? But you don't want to lose sight of the macro, which is the vision. And that's why an approach I share as well is macro patience and micro speed. So you want to have speed in the short term. So you're constantly testing, experimenting, and trying, but you want to be patient about the vision at the macro level. You don't want to rush it because these things take time, but you want to be in the mode of constantly moving forward. That's where the momentum comes from.
Yeah.
So that's what I would share. But actually, one other thing that came in my head just as I was speaking, Rhea, is, and I think it's more pertinent now than probably when I even started writing my book, which is accessing the creative energy that we are born with. And entrepreneurship for me is all about creativity. When you start a business, you are given this blank canvas, and your challenge is to decide how to paint that canvas. And I think that if you can access that creativity, you're able to come up with novel and unique ways of sharing your message with the world, your product or your service that would get people's attention. And the more creative they are, the more it gets people talking.
Yeah. No, brilliant. Absolutely great. And I think really good things for people to channel and think about as well. But no, that's awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I hugely appreciate it. It's been brilliant to chat to you.
My pleasure, Rhea, and best of luck with the book.
Thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. If you've enjoyed it, hopefully you have, please consider rating and reviewing the book as well. And if you want to find out more about Simon, go to www.simonalexanderong.com, and you can also find Simon on LinkedIn. He's particularly great on LinkedIn and on other platforms too. Thanks so much.